Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us. I'm Anarita Bashaliva, along with co-host Dr. Victor Fett, Dr. Katerina Shrey, and our program producer, Professor Danish. We host a weekly discussion panel on Russia's war on Ukraine with guests from Ukraine, military experts, medical personnel, academics, artists, literary figures, and relief workers. Our panel is recorded and circulated nationally and internationally. We appreciate your comments and feedback. Special thanks to Marshall University Libraries and MUIT for making this weekly event possible. If you are joining us live on Teams, please feel free to use the chat to post any questions for our guest. A quick greetings to our viewers in Ukraine from Professor Katerina Shrey.
Вітаємо наших слухачів в Україні з глибоким покліном. Ми далі свідки вашого страшного терпіння і також вашої великої сили. Дякую вам за вашу участь в нашій тижневій програмі.
Thank you. Today's guest will be introduced by Professor Victor Fett.
Thank you, Anara. We are honored today to host Jens Alstrup, a Danish journalist and volunteer whose work in Ukraine is remarkable, and we are eager to hear all about his work over the last 2 years. It is 2 years tomorrow that marks a sad date of the February 24th, 2022, the full-scale Russian aggression in Ukraine. We live in this part of history, and we are trying to do our small contribution, but we are honored to have one of the heroes here who can tell us in English to those who will listen and make decisions to all of our audience of Ukraine podcast. Thank you very much for joining us, and welcome, Jens Alstrup. The microphone is yours, please.
Thank you very much for having me. It's a great pleasure, a great honor to be here. I have a small presentation for about half an hour, and after that there will be good time for questions and debate, which is a very important part in most cases. Let me introduce myself. I'm in no way a scholar. I am self-made, self-taught. I have always been reading, studying history, becoming more and more dedicated, more and more systematic, not only using time on history, but also using time on reading about methods and so on. You can say it was a volunteer private study in history. I have been traveling a lot in Siberia and all of Russia, actually. My first introduction to Russia and the East, meaning the East as we saw it from the West during the Cold War, meaning everything east of the Iron Curtain. That was Russia in Magadan in 1996, where I wanted to be the first ever to cross all of Russia on a bicycle. I didn't do it that year. I had to go back next year in 1997, and at that time I did make my record. I have been traveling in Siberia several times afterwards for leisure, as well as for studying. And as for studying, it was in cooperation with the human rights organization Memorial, which is also forbidden in Russia today. My purpose to go there was to go to Kolyma, which is the name of the camp system in the East, the worst system of Gulag in Stalin's slave empire. There were specific camps worse, but as a whole concentration of camps, nothing surpassed Kolyma. The actual name, because Kolyma, if you look at a map, you will only find the river, but the area around the spring of the Kolyma River is the area that the prisoners called, and as well as the guards called, Kolyma. The actual name of the organization was Dalstroy, Far Eastern Construction Company in English. Anyway, this is not the topic today, but it's about my background. I wrote articles about it in Novaya Gazeta, the opposition newspaper, and it gave me some fame in Russia. As for the bicycling, I was called the most famous Dane in Russia in 1997, and there are still people in Russia remembering it. So you can say from a geographical point of view that I know Russia better than even 99% of the Russians, because I have been so much in Siberia in almost all parts. Personally, I gave up on Russia in 2012. By coincidence, I should interview some former Kolyma prisoners in Moscow, and I did that in, I think it was November 2011, and that coincided with the big demonstrations at the Bolotnaya Square organized by Alexei Navalny. And next time I was in Moscow was in, I think that was February 2012. And that was again, and I promise it wasn't a coincidence, at the same time as the Navalny organized demonstrations or demonstration again at Bolotnaya. At that time, I was very hopeful that the opposition had gained momentum, and if that had been realized into real action, we would not sit here today, because I cannot believe there would have been a war if Navalny had took over power. I know he was a nationalist, especially in his youth, but he wasn't a person who wanted to make war with other countries. From being a nationalist to being one who will make war, there is quite a distance. The logo you see here is the logo of our association in Denmark called Freedom for Ukraine. We are about, I think at the moment we are something like 150 members. It's not very impressive, but it's only very recently we have opened for memberships. So we are increasing quite rapidly. More impressive numbers are the personal followers I have on Facebook. That's above 15,000 people. In Denmark, that is very big. That's the size of our what should I say, our impact in Danish media and Danish debate. It started that I wrote a daily update or almost a daily update on Facebook about the situation. I started in December 2021 after the ultimatum of Putin. And that very day, the 17th of December 2021, I wrote to my friend, a Danish former foreign minister and still active politician, that this meant war. His reply was, Jens, I cannot believe it. It will be too costly for Russia. And I had to reply back and say it has nothing about Russia to do. It's not about what is good for the country or not. It's the personal whims of Putin that made this. He should be understood as a gang leader. He was raised according his own biography with the Vordevice, meaning the thieves of law, again meaning the Russian mafia in Petersburg, or at that time Leningrad. So it's very important not to expect him to act like a politician. it's much wiser to judge him and expect his next move as a gang leader, because that is what he's doing. He's making these huge risks. And in 2014, it was taking Crimea, starting the so-called civil war in eastern Ukraine. He even himself has stated now that it was in no way a civil war. It was Russian troops inside Ukraine. My favorite transport when I'm on reportage journeys in Ukraine is a motorcycle. There are several reasons for it. First of all, it's very good on the worst Ukrainian roads. And should there come any troubles where I, in an emergency, need to leave, the motorcycle can move almost anywhere. And first of all, never forget, I love riding motorcycles, and that in itself is a very good reason for using it, of course. This is after my second motorcycle journey last year in Uzhhorod, and my friend who lives there. He's not the one on the motorcycle though, but my friend that lives there, he lives about 300 meters from Slovakia. So it is as safe can be in Ukraine. Russia doesn't dare bombing that side. It's too close to NATO. And everywhere people attend me and want to talk with me, and that is because of the motorcycle. And if you are working as a journalist, you can only be happy that people want to talk with you. So the motorcycle is an absolutely brilliant way of transport. And in this case, it was the neighbor where the little son so much wanted to sit on the motorcycle, and of course he was allowed to do that. I will tell you briefly about the war in Ukraine, how it is in this very moment. You have had information every week during all the war, so I'm sure you are relatively well informed about the present state. But I am afraid that what I have to tell you today is quite alarming, unfortunately. During the summer last year, Ukraine made an offensive in the south, and by option, an offensive in the Bakhmut area. And you will see some pictures from the Bakhmut offensive, because I was there the very day they took Klishchiivka, meaning that I was in the middle of the artillery on the receiving side, unfortunately. But I speak with you today, so everything went fine. That we cannot say about the summer offensive. The expectations were very, very high because the autumn offensive in 2022 was so very successful that they pushed the Russians back from the surroundings of Kharkiv. Kherson came back, and other big areas came back into Ukrainian control. So expectations were high. They had a brand new army with Western tanks, especially German Leopard 2, which are very advanced tanks. But and we also learned them NATO tactics in a very big education arrangement or operation in Britain, with a lot of European and American and Canadian instructors being at the facilities in Britain, educating the new Ukrainian army. So they learned NATO tactics, and they started with NATO tactics. It took about 1 or 2 days, and then they dropped the NATO tactics, because the problem was that the NATO tactic is, first, we get absolute air superiority, but we did not give Ukraine any aircrafts, no fighter planes, meaning that the first step of NATO tactics was simply not an option. We gave them half what they needed, and it was the most important half we did not give them, meaning an air force, a modern air force. And it gave huge losses during the first days, and therefore they went back to their own tactics that have been very successful, and that is basically that you have a great army working as small battalions, attacking wherever they see an option on a day-to-day basis. Very chaotic, and this chaos is an advantage against the Russian army that's very, very much top-down controlled, like in the Soviet days, meaning they never react. So even in offensive, the Ukrainians were able to inflict casualties at the rate of 1 to 3. And that is amazing. Usually you will have more losses than the defender. And in this case, it was 1 to 3. And that is, of course, an estimate. Ukraine is very silent about the casualties. So you have to believe in my estimates on that, because there are no official figures. But the offensive was not successful. During the winter, the Russians had plenty of time to make very, very deep defenses, and every single yard cost a lot of efforts from the Ukrainian side. So basically, in late autumn last year, they had to give up the offensive, and in early winter, or at least in December, the Russians started their offensive, and it was at Kherson, it was near Vuhledar, it was Avdiivka, it was Bakhmut area, and it was up in the Kupiansk district in the north that they made attacks. They concentrated their offensive against Avdiivka, and there you must be very careful about what's stated about it. From many sides, they're trying to say that, oh, Avdiivka wasn't that important after all. But remember, it is a town that is the most important platform to make an attack against Donetsk city. You can stand in Avdiivka. I have been there 2 times in 2017 when the war was not very intensive, but still relatively intensive in Avdiivka. It was a hot spot, and you could just look out from the hill and watch over the Donetsk airport and the suburbs of Donetsk. So as minimum, we can say that Ukraine has lost a town that increases the distance for victory, maybe not in yards and miles, but in effort. It has been increased tremendously to make a victory later. And of course, when you lose a position you have been able to control for 10 years with numerous attacks, in periods, even several attacks every day, and you finally lose it. You lose it. It is a very big loss on the Ukrainian side. And it was no wonder when I celebrated Christmas in Ukraine with the soldiers, we talked about that Avdiivka was a lost case. The Republicans in America withheld the supplies of the finance of ammunition to Ukraine, and the European Union. We are just as guilty, unfortunately. We promised to deliver 1 million 155 millimeter shells. We delivered less than 300,000. Not because we didn't have the money or we would not pay for it, but we simply don't have the factories. These shells do not exist, and we cannot deliver what is not there. It's not an option. So basically, when the Russians attacked, the Ukrainians had nothing to shoot back with. I know that crews on specific artillery pieces, they got in the morning 6 shells, and they were told that the offensive was in the afternoon, and 6 shells, it's about 1.5 minutes, and that would be the offensive from this specific piece of artillery. So it's no wonder that Ukraine is on the retreat right now, and it does look very black, very black. It's very serious at the moment. It's not too late to help them. I must say that it seems that we in Europe have been awakened. We are really doing things at emergency pace because we have realized how serious it is. And I must say, I was in our parliament the 7th of February, no, the 7th of January, and I did not in any way hide the seriousness of the situation. And I think that the politicians understood how serious it really was, and they finally accept my valuation of the situation. Here you see me with the soldier Sergei. I have known him since 2017. He's one of the heroes from the airport, Donetsk airport, meaning just outside of Avdiivka. It's very few that survived that, and it was absolutely hell on earth inside that airport. He was before the war, he was a school teacher. He was educating the children in history, and he is a very friendly person, really a good friend. You will not talk for long with Sergei before you will like him very much. There are people that really has that ability, and Sergei certainly is one of them. And here was my entrance into the different Ukrainian units, and on deliveries, he helps us to point out the units that are in most dire need of the stuff we can supply, and that is, of course, civilian things. We have this joke when I ask, what do you need? They say F-16, and I have to say that that's unfortunately not what we can deliver, but we can deliver hot winter uniforms, good boots, things like that. Also civilian drones that they actually use for military use. First thing you meet in Ukraine when you travel in the country is the block posts where they check ID and so on. At the beginning of the war, there were block posts, and when I say beginning of the war now, I mean at the beginning of the full-scale war in 2022. Nobody knew where and how long the Russians would go. So every block post was, in actual fact, a defense position against real army units. And the pictures I was showing you now, they are from that early stage. Today there are still many block posts, of course, but not so much in the back country. First of all, it's in the war zone, and the war zone is green, yellow, red. Red is where the actual fighting is. Yellow is where you can get hit by shells, missiles, so on. And the green one is still war zone. You have to show your ID. You must have permission to be there. I have army accreditation, so that's the yellow, the green part of the war zone. And here you can see the road signs. They are blacked out. And in a modern world where everybody with a smartphone has a GPS, this is kind of funny when you look at it at first glance. But during the low intensity war from 2014, when the war was officially a civil war, it didn't look so good when you saw Russian citizens making selfies deep inside Ukraine. And therefore, the Russian army prohibited the soldiers to bring their smartphones into Ukraine. And the vehicles, the army vehicles from Russia, are not that modern, so few of them have GPS. So in reality, they have to navigate like our grandfathers did during, or great grandfathers did during World War II with paper maps. And when you have a map with a paper, this makes your navigation very difficult. So it has a real purpose. Those who speak Ukrainian, is when I do lectures here in Denmark and I show this picture, the Ukrainians are getting very red. It's the F word, the not so nice one, and it's the F word yourself at top, and it's more F yourself in the middle, and it's go to Russia and F yourself there. The Ukrainian humor, including the more latrine type of it, I love it very much. They make many jokes about the war, and although it's not a laughing matter, of course, but in order to mentally survive, they do, and it's good that they do it. And I love many of the jokes. I will not bring them now, so they are usually very long. Here you see the blog post, and this soldier is actually it's National Guard, and he's approximately my age, and not him, but a similar guard showed me on his cell phone a picture where he was standing with a javelin. And I was thinking, yeah, okay, they put a lot of weapons in my hands, so that meant nothing. But then he pointed out at the field, and he said, over there came a T-72, so a Russian tank, and I hit it with the javelin. And that really impressed me, because it was not just for show. Then I jokingly said to him, yes, but you had to fight because you're old and big like me, so you couldn't run away from them. And he laughed back and he said, yeah, that's right. So we must fight. And so that's how it is. There are bunkers below earth. There are trenches along these blog posts. And the exact position is, of course, a secret. I have been with the medics and in this case it's from Liman. Here is the chauffeur at the ambulance. His name is Gennady, and his call name is Africa. He has been traveling with his wife across most of Africa on bicycles. And so we had a lot to talk about on that regard. In this case, it was much more serious. It was a young Ukrainian soldier at the Liman area outside a village named Yampil, where, and it's a dense forest. You cannot see the enemy until he's right in front of you. And this soldier most likely have been there for 1.5 years, 1 year perhaps. And he simply got enough. He couldn't mentally do it anymore. So he, with 99% probability, took his pistol and raised it to his own head and pulled the trigger. Here he is. You can see it's bleeding from his head. We were starting from the stabilization point, and it was bleeding already when we started, after he had been put together with a bandage, and his heartbeat was very high. He was alive, but the medics told me that there was no chance that he could survive this. The bullet was deep inside his brain, and actually, we really must hope for the poor soul that he didn't survive. The roads are much better today than they were in 2017 when I was there first time. And for sure, they are better than Siberia in the 90s. But many bridges are blown to pieces, and here is a pontoon bridge that we have to cross to deliver the wounded soldier to the nearest hospital. And here we arrive at the hospital, and you can see the blood has increased a lot. So there is no chance that he survived. Really, this is a tragedy within the tragedy already. And I understand them. I have been with several crying soldiers. The soldiers could never dream of crying to each other. But I'm the neutral part. So when they meet me and they know that when they find out that I have actually been at first line, then I see a lot of tears and a lot of confessions. It's also hard for me, and I also have difficulties to keep my tears back, even when I speak to you now. The very front line, the first time I should go to the very first line, and that is very difficult because basically the way to get there is breaking the rules. But I was with the 3rd Attack Brigade, which is Azov. They are very hard soldiers, and I was with their medics. And here I met them in the evening after having been with an ambulance all day. And they said to me, Jens, we promised you an armored vehicle tomorrow. Are you sure you want to go to the front? Because we can unfortunately not deliver this armored vehicle because it was blown to pieces today. And I said, yeah, I will go. I was ready even to go on my motorcycle, so why not in something different? And then they said to me, yes, because it's this one where you are going to the front line tomorrow. And yes, I still said yes, I wanted to go, but I did have a small moment of of hesitation when I saw it. Of course, I did. It's dangerous on this, of course. These pictures are not in order from the very day. It's in general terms from many of my experiences where I show pictures from the front line, and now I have been there several times. This is from Drushkivka. When I was there first time, it was within artillery range, and there was a lot of artillery. The town is quite badly hit. But still, things function. You can go to the supermarket, you can go to fast food bars, and so on. You must be very careful if you go to fast food and there are many soldiers, because when you have many soldiers around you, you will be a prized target, and a missile can come immediately after. So find places with less than 10 soldiers, and if there are more, stay away. That's the general rule. The paved road to Bakhmut is controlled by Russian artillery, and that is the direction I'm going here. So we are going on a dirt road, and this is very early morning. It's quite peaceful actually, but there is nothing romantic about it at all. It's a very bad place. It's very close to Chasiv Yar, this picture. And there are people who had been at Chasiv Yar, journalists, volunteers, and so on. And it is a dangerous place, but I went further out from Chasiv Yar. and this is very close to the front line. When I took this picture, this very spot was controlled by the Russians the day before, so it's almost impossible to get closer. It was 155 millimeters that hit here, and it hit the storage of Russian ammunition, and it didn't explode, as you can see, but ammunition like this, some of it you can jump on it without anything will happen, and other shells you can just look at them and they will explode. So it's extremely dangerous to be with them or be near them. So you must be very careful where you put your feet. There were a lot of talk. There was a lot of talk about the Russian supplies. The soldiers were starving, it was said, but I could see from the trenches, the Russian trenches, that there was a lot of food supply. So at least in the area around Bakhmut, it wasn't true. They were not starving. There were also stories about cheap Chinese protection vests, basically made for soft guns, meaning those ones that teenagers play with, and old teenagers as well play with, where you shoot at each other and you will have paint on you when you are hit. And this is protection vest for that kind of weapon. And as you can see with real weapons, it doesn't give you any protection at all. Russian uniforms where he didn't need it anymore. And one thing I noticed there, not when I was there, but when I was back at the hotel, and I smelled I had the smell from the dead bodies. I never hope that I will experience that again. I probably will. But it's a very bad experience. I tried to talk with the Danish veterans from Afghanistan and Iraq and ex-Yugoslavia, and they simply didn't want to talk about it. Later, one of the Danish veterans contacted me and said, Jens, you will only find few people who will talk with you about that kind of experience. I had this in Yugoslavia, and 30 years after, I still wake in the middle of the night and have this smell in my nose. Here I am very close to Klishchiivka, which is the latest town that the Ukrainians took back. And we are in good mood, and those two are the ones that followed me around in that day. Here I am, only 1,000 meters from the very first line. I saw a helicopter attack when I was there. It was a Ukrainian helicopter attacking the Russian positions, and I could just see it watching from the position here. So we were very, very close. And that was a situation where one of the soldiers found out that I had been actually at the 0 point at that line earlier on. I don't have pictures of that because I don't want to take pictures of soldiers that I don't know. There can be soldiers with a family on the other side of the war, and it can make huge problems for them if they are recognized in Russia, if that is the case. So I only take pictures of soldiers I know. But in this case, one of the soldiers wanted to show me their storage of ammunition, and when we went there, he talked about that he had been there for 1.5 years, and every single day he see his friends coming back in body bags from line 0, and he is simply worn down. I don't tell you which one it is. It's embarrassing for them if I told. But these kinds of experiences I have had a lot of. It is putting an extremely hard strain on the soldiers. And the Ukrainians cannot make as much rotation as the Russians in principle were able to do. But the Russians don't do it either because they have huge losses. So their rotation is more or less where they put their soldiers in the grave and get new soldiers all the time. Here they pose for me with their machine gun. They use these old machine guns against the Shahed drones, and it's quite effective against the drones. Here I am with another unit on inspection along the zero line, and we are walking in the wood to see the different positions. And suddenly there was a Russian drone over us, and we had to hide. And I can assure you that even big men are very small in such a situation. I didn't feel very comfortable myself, I must say. It was not an armed drone. I'm sure of that. There was an artillery exchange at that spot when we were there, where the Ukrainian artillery tried to hit the Russian artillery and vice versa. And we were sitting right below the shells going in each direction. And I have, from earlier experience, found out how the sound is when it's going against you and when it's going away from you. So I knew there was not any immediate danger for us, but the drone could change the priority of the Russian artillery. So it was not. It was a dangerous situation. But after some time, it went away and we could continue our inspection. Here we go into an open field, and we are within a shooting range from the Russians. It has to be a good sniper, but good snipers exist, so one should be careful. And I could feel my 60 years. I'm not 24 anymore. The protection vest is about 15 kilos. I have 10 kilos of photo equipment and helmet. So I had my trouble in the open there. Putin says that he doesn't attack anything but military targets. This is a 500-kilogram aerial bomb that hit, and it's very next. It's very, very close to a stabilization point, meaning a hospital. I cannot tell you where because those positions are secret. There was a French journalist who was at a position where they had the stabilization point, and he showed pictures in his on social media next day. And the Russians targeted their artillery to the point. There was even geotagging on the pictures, and the price of that event was 22 lives from doctors and patients. So one must be very careful about this. But you can see it's very big, a 500-kilogram bomb. When we think about those who are interested in weapons, will know from World War II that there was even a 5-ton bomb, meaning 10 times this one. But 500 kilograms, that's more than enough, especially for a stabilization point. Here is Yampil. That's where the unfortunate young soldier shot himself in the head. And I was there at another occasion, and we saw a Ukrainian tank with where the belt was broken, and they were repairing it. It's not that the ladder is trying to move the tank. The ladder is trying to move the belt, and only the belt on the tank. It was a T-62, meaning it's a very, very old tank. It's most likely it's older than me, and for sure it's older than all the soldiers. To stay at a point like that, only 14 kilometers from the Russian positions is absolutely stupid, because a tank, if a drone sees it, it will immediately be a target. And when I stand there making photos and interviews, I can be hit too. But I do many stupid things. Here it's repaired. And a small fun fact about Soviet designed tanks, that is the crew on Soviet built tanks or Soviet designed tanks, is that they are very small. And that's because I don't know what it is in feet and inches, but 175 centimeters, that's maximum you can be in order to be able to sit in a Soviet tank. So it's quite small crew members. And here it's repaired, and it's driving back to the front line for active duty. One thing that some war correspondents warned me against was not to be too closely engaged with the soldiers. That was not what I wanted. I wanted to be engaged with them and be close to them. And I have celebrated Christmas and New Year with them. Here it's a New Year with the New Year tree, which is Soviet tradition, and on both sides they keep it that way. Yes, the warning against this engagement was very valid, and I have a lot of tears because of people that are no more. And here we celebrate the very 12 o'clock at the front line. Time is running. There's not so much time left. I have some statistics. It's not so important, really. I can show you a little from the war zone where the civilians try to survive, and you can see it's impossible. It's very, very difficult. There are so many ruins. Here you see the flags at the Independence Square in Kiev to memorize the fallen soldiers, and there are so many flags. This is the figure from today. More than 400,000 killed Russian soldiers by Ukrainian estimate. I think it's the most valid estimate we have, but of course it's Ukrainian estimate, so we cannot be absolutely sure. But it's absolutely a carnage at the front line. We have to go back to, at least in Europe, we have to go back to World War II to find anything similar to this. Many civilians are evacuated. There were found torture chambers in Kherson. And for the record, I also cooperate with volunteer Russians. There are Russians fighting in Ukrainian uniform, and they live a very dangerous life because the bad Russians, those who are fighting on the other side, they really have those for us good Russians as a top target. Yeah, that's when I was driving home. The roads are not always that good. And here's a slide about donations for us. We deliver clothes, boots, backpacks, military backpacks, and other stuff for the soldiers. Drones as well. So thank you very much. That was it became very long. So but I stopped showing here, and now it's time for questions.
Thank you so much, Jens. We're all speechless, and we only can thank you so much for your service and enthusiasm and ability to do this. I see our friends joining from Denmark, and I see questions already from our regulars in the United States. So let's go by the order. Dr. Deutsch, you have your hand raised electronically. Please turn on your camera. Leonard Deutsch.
Can you
Yes.
can you hear me, Victor?
We hear you, yes. Can you show yourself?
If you can't see me, that is something I can't do anything about. In your introductory remarks, you mentioned Navalny. As a journalist, do you have any insights that you can share with me on his demise?
No, not really, or actually not at all. Only what you see in the public media. Of course, it's a very typical way. It's so badly hidden who was behind it that the way of dealing with him was a message. It was not supposed that we should not know who is guilty. It's the terror against the Russian population we are talking about. It's important that people know what was happening to scare off anybody else who could get ideas like Navalny.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jens. Please, comments and questions. Nina,
May I ask a
please.
question?
Sure.
Thank you very much, Jens, for your very touching, important, and tragic story. It's so great what you do for Ukrainian people, for soldiers and refugees. I have a question because after this tragical murder of Alexei Navalny, we all somehow connect things together. And I have a question. What is your opinion? Do you think that Navalny's murder can have influence for more and better help to Ukraine, especially after Yulia Navalny met with Joe Biden? What is your opinion?
I think the fall of Avdiivka, together with the murder of Navalny, I think it made a real impact in the West, and it was a much needed impact because basically at the moment, if nothing happens, we are at the moment seeing that Ukraine can lose the war. That is how serious it is right now. If we do what we do now, which is not very much, of many reasons, I told you about it in the beginning, Ukraine will lose, and maybe even already this year. So in that sense, you can say, or maybe better hope, that it was not in vain that Navalny died. I also want to add that Navalny is absolutely not popular in Ukraine. Very much on the contrary. When Putin or when Russia annexed Crimea, Navalny stated, by my memory, similar to what I say now, "Oh no, now he took Crimea. Crimea is Russian, it belongs to us, but now we will never have a referendum that the West will believe in. So in reality, now we have lost Crimea." And Putin propaganda, of course, cut off the beginning and the end. So Crimea is Russian. That is what was broadcasted all the time, in text, in sound, in video, whatever. And yes, he said that, but he also said something before and something after. And as Navalny in his youth was an extreme nationalist, he was that in his youth, then Ukrainians are absolutely ready to believe in that. And very important is that he signed, as good as you can sign when you are sitting in a camp in Siberia, the common statement from the combined Russian opposition, saying that when any of them gains power, they will immediately hand back all occupied areas to Ukraine, including Crimea, and redraw all Russian troops outside Ukraine. So that is the statement also from Navalny. But even when I mention it, it's the Ukrainians have shut their ears off in that state. So in Ukraine, it doesn't make much difference. They see him as a nationalist.
Yes, thank you. Thank you very much for your answer.
Thank you, Jens. Do we have, please, more questions? Tony? No?
Then can I ask one more question? Because
yes, please.
Yes, it's okay.
Katerina?
Because
Or Nina, please, yes,
yes, because I have really many questions, but at least this one is very important for me privately.
please.
Jens, that's true that you know the Russian history maybe better than many Russians. And it's my private story, the story of my family, because in my family there are also victims for Stalin's repressions. What is your opinion? Why it was possible again for Russia to come back to dictatorship? Because the many victims of Stalin's repressions, in reality, there were never the real repentance. The memorial is forbidden, and the victims are forgotten almost, you can say in this way. Do you think it is connection? What is your opinion?
Oh, Russia never had this handling of history like Germany had. Vergangenheitsverwaltigung is the German word of it. And it's almost too much the way Germans are doing it today, because they are so reluctant to rearm, and we really need them to rearm. And I can assure you, my grandfather, if he could hear it, he would rotate in his grave. Because armed
Exactly.
Germans was absolutely unacceptable for him, but we need it now. But what I wanted to say by that is we had a perfect example with many faults during history. We know that today, but in general, Germany has handled their history in a very exemplary way, unlike Japan, unlike well, actually also unlike the British Empire, and especially Russia. They have not handled their history, even in early time of Putin's rule.
Exactly.
Stalin was the second most popular leader from
Mm.
Russian history. It's absolutely horrible, and
Horrible.
there were many Gulag victims alive when that poll was made.
Exactly. Exactly. And murders were not punished, and it was just forgotten it all. And, you know, because I think a lot why it was possible that Russia came back to the dictatorship.
Yes,
It's
but he did it with the salami methods, one small slice at a time, and
mm,
suddenly it was at a point of no return.
mm,
And you can say a lot negative about Putin and his abilities. If you read his thesis on economics, you would say, okay, it's good for a 70-year-old, but it has nothing to do with academia. So he's not able to do that, and you can also see on his abilities as the big military strategist is also very horrible, and his if he really was good, we wouldn't talk today, because the war would be over in Russia's favor. Fortunately, he was interfering personally,
mm,
and they made huge losses out of that. But there is one thing where he's good, and that is the role as dictator, at suppressing his own
mm,
uh, people and being able to control his system. And we must not forget that still in Russia, you have this imperialism. You still have it deep inside many Russians, just
mhm,
like the Germans had this militarism inside of them
mhm.
up to and including Second World War.
Yes.
We need that the Russians come to terms with their history and
Ex-
remove this imperialism out of them in order to have a peaceful country where we can live side by side
yes.
in the future.
Exactly. Thank you very much, Jens.
Thank you, Jens. I see Dr. Shrey. Katerina, please, you have questions, comments.
I
Katerina,
do. I do.
yeah, please.
So I'm wondering, first of all, thank you for everything you're doing. I've read a little bit about you. Very grateful for your heroism. Very grateful too for you helping us understand better what it's like to be there. Things like if you see 10 soldiers at a fast food place, don't go there because and why? And because you're a target for a missile strike. These are things that are just beyond our comprehension here. Things we just do not think about here. My mother recalls from World War II the smell of death. And I don't want to go into any more details, not to extend that trauma to our listeners. I've never experienced it, but my heart breaks for you that you have. My question is actually specific to you as a journalist. About a month after this terrible war started, Fox reporter Benjamin Hall was gravely injured, horrific injuries in a car explosion outside of Kiev. And his story, we've been like, I remember watching coverage of the war. I remember seeing a young journalist, Trey Yingst, on there, and just hoping that this poor kid would be okay. And just one, and because you could see the bombs exploding in the background as these journalists. So I think all of us are very grateful to our journalists who risk their lives to go on the front lines and report these stories. I know that in other conflicts, journalists have this saying, journalist or press or something. Is there anything like that in Ukraine? In this horrible war, is there a respect for journalists? Is there some kind of protection, acknowledgement that they're there for purposes of reporting? Can you please talk a little bit about your experience as a journalist and what your status is as a journalist in this conflict?
I signed that. I signed different rules. I'm not allowed to report on different things. For example, if a missile hit and I make photos of it, I must wait. I think it's 48 hours before I publish it, because otherwise the Russians can see how accurate they were hitting,
Oh, wow.
and they use it for future military use. That's only one example. Another thing is that I should wear a sign saying press. The soldiers and officers at the front line, they don't care about it. And I don't want to use it because today journalists are top target. We are not as important as drone pilots and sharpshooters, but we are ranking just below that and above ordinary soldiers as important targets. So I don't want to be expose myself as a top target.
Well, wait, a
So
naive
I
question on
don't
my.
use it.
So, why is that? Why is so? Why are journalists such a high target?
Because most of the journalists are not reporting very favorable about Russia and the Russian war effort in Ukraine. It is the first black and white war, so to speak, since World War II. I mean, in World War II, there was a real villain or two villains, Japan and Germany. And in this case, well, like Poland in 1939, it was a military dictatorship. It wasn't in no way a perfect state seen by our present time standards, but it was attacked. And likewise with Ukraine, there is a lot of corruption. There are many problems in Ukraine, but they were attacked in a direct, undisguised, conquering attack. And that makes this war so black and white. And the good ones in this case, with all the conditions I mentioned, and only some of them, that is the good guys, they are the Ukrainians. And I also see that not so few Russians are volunteering in Ukrainian uniform.
Oh, wow, wow. Thank you for your answer. And thank you for your courage. I see that Mr. Somin has a question, so I'm going to yield the floor to him.
Oh,
Please,
thank you.
if
Can you hear me?
Yes.
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 You can hear me.
Yes.
Great. Okay. Thank you very much, Jens. I see on your Facebook a call for a demonstration in Copenhagen tomorrow. And I'm happy to report there'll be a demonstration tomorrow in Boston as well, hopefully a big one. I'd like to add a little bit to your statement about early criminal background of Putin.
Yes.
I grew up in a neighborhood called in St. Petersburg called Pesky, the Sands, and it turns out that he also grew up in that neighborhood. I found a video about, in a series of a large series of videos about various neighborhoods of St. Petersburg, where a historian talks about a little garden next to my house, to which Putin, when he was a teenager, would come for street fights with other street thugs from a similar neighborhood. So that is, I can actually post a link to that video to where that story goes. It kind of is done there as a warm, nostalgic flavor, but of course we know that it's not very warm, from today's point of view. So that's just a confirmation of that. I can put it on the chat if you think it would be useful.
Thank you very much. Yes, it will. Thank you.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you again.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Efim, very much. Any more comments or questions, please, from the guests or the?
Can I maybe ask one more question?
Nina,
Because
please
I'm a
do.
little bit curious. What is the figure of Zelensky today? Is he popular still, or the attitude to the president is changing? What is your opinion? What is your observation?
Yes. When you talk with the soldiers, it's very different when you from when you talk with the civilians. Zelensky had, at least until the dismissal of Zelensky, he was very popular among the civilians. People thought that he was doing very good, especially outside Ukraine, which is obviously of paramount importance. But when you talk with the soldiers, he never was very popular. Yes, when he was elected, yes. But the first thing he did was saying that he wanted to negotiate with Russia, and he closed down several very important military projects. Most important, the whole drone department in Kiev, a department we so much needed at the beginning of full-scale war, but it didn't exist anymore. And with these departments, young scientists, young students, absolutely brilliant young people with a lot of ideas that we older ones don't have. Because it's absolutely new technology. It's a bleeding edge of technology they are working with, and they have very creative ideas. And they made marvels in those years. I visited the department actually in 2017 with a Danish politician. So I have seen it. I have talked with them. I have touched the drones and anti-missile systems and so on. So I have seen it with my own eyes. Um, and that made him quite unpopular in the army. The phrase I hear very often is, "You cannot win wars with good roads. You need weapons." Of course, you need good roads as well. You also need a civilian society that works and make the economic foundation for the war, and roads are important in that. But totally to close down these departments was very bad for the Ukrainian war effort. And after Zelensky, he doesn't have the same popularity anymore. I must take defense to Zelensky in that case too. It's not unlike General MacArthur and Harry S. Truman in America. Not the same scale, though. Zelensky didn't want to use nukes against Russia or something like that, as MacArthur wanted against China. But he did make some political essays about how he saw politics should be in Ukraine in order to win the war. And as a general, that is not his job. He was trespassing into an area that really is off limits for a general. So to be fair, Zelensky did in that way the correct thing, but he did sack a very popular general and a very capable general.
Thank you. Thank you for your answer. It is really interesting.
Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you, Nina. We see some activity in chat. Please.
Yes, Dr. Smith has a great question. Her background is in trauma and counseling, and so we're going to yield the floor to her. Great questions.
Yes.
Please
Hi.
go.
Hi, Mr. Alstrup. I am a counseling professor at Marshall University, and I train students how to become trauma-informed counselors. What I'm seeing happening in Ukraine is beyond what we're preparing our students for. We don't have vocabulary for what Ukraine is experiencing. And I noticed an opinion piece yesterday in the New York Times talking about Gaza and the Palestinians in Gaza experiencing a trauma that, a level of trauma that the mental health field, at least in the United States, doesn't have any capacity for understanding. Given what you've talked about today, I'm very keen to hear what you think Ukraine needs in the future in its rebuilding. I'm going to hang on to the fact that America will somehow come through and Ukraine will win this war, because America needs to understand how serious this is. So assuming that, and assuming that we're going to be involved in the rebuilding of Ukraine, what do you think we in the mental health field can do for the rebuilding of Ukraine, given the level of what they're experiencing?
Yes, there have been some estimates of it very recently in Ukraine. First of all, it's something like 9 million people who have escaped Ukraine. They live for the most part in Western Europe, but also some in Canada, America, and other overseas area. And that alone makes a huge problem to rebuild Ukraine. Also, when it comes to deal with the trauma, the psychological, the physical trauma after the war. And at the beginning of the war, it was only about 10%, and those were the refugees going to Poland. That's the only place from where we have these figures. About 10% at the beginning of the war said that they didn't want to go back. 90% wanted to go back. Now we are talking about something like 70% not wanting to go back. It's a demographic catastrophe for the country. Absolutely a catastrophe. And it's already a country that don't get many children. The fertility is very low in Ukraine. And when it comes to the psychological problems after the war, it's estimated that something like 9 million people of the 34 million people left in Ukraine will need some kind of mental treatment after the war. It can be from too few soft words and 2 tablets, and that's it, and up to lifelong treatment, psychological treatment, and everything between that. But 9 million, it's almost impossible. Personally, I think that we should use a lot of time to study the after effects from World War I and World War II. We need to go back to that to find something similar in size. And it's absolutely impossible for them to treat that many people. They did in 2017 copy the Danish method. We didn't have that many traumatized veterans, but we did have some, and our capacity on it was extremely small. Therefore, we had to find a method, and it's a kind of the same way of working as Alcoholic Anonymous, where it's self-treatment groups making self-therapy. And in that way, the professional capacity can spread out the number of patients to a huge extent.
That makes a great deal of sense. Yes.
Yes, I think that is the way to go. Personally, I hope that we could have a rehabilitation center in Denmark near the German border. Um, and because we have low capacity in Denmark at our hospitals for the time being, and the capacity in Germany is better. So it's a practical approach that I suggest it should be near Germany, because then we can pay the German capacity and use that. And the idea is that we should educate Ukrainians in Denmark that don't want to stay in Denmark. So after the war, we can move the whole institution back to Ukraine, except the bricks.
Well,
So that's the idea. But it takes a long time to make this idea real, if ever. But something like that is one way to help them. Oh, and the physical thing, not to forget the Soviet Union and all countries that came out of the Soviet Union, the conditions, the living conditions there for disabled people are very bad. It's like just to get to the pavement on the pedestrian is a big problem if you are in a wheelchair. And you don't have the elevators, you have steps to get into the shop and so on and so forth. It's a horrible life that are waiting for them after this war. So on bricks and mortar, we should also help them to make their country better for disabled people.
Thank you so much. I have a colleague who hopefully will be able to find time in his schedule to present in this very forum on what the work that he's doing for military families in Ukraine. He is an American, lives in Colorado, a lot of mental health experience, a lot of military experience as well, and he's been back and forth to Ukraine for many years now. I think he's been back to Ukraine at least 10 times since the war started, since 2023. And he is working with another colleague to start a Institute of Trauma therapy in Kyiv. I put the web link for it in the chat. Now, this is all proposed. I mean, they're asking for donations, and I think they've got $250 of a $300,000 or $500,000 goal. So they've, I
Yes.
mean, they've got a long, long way to go. But there are people who do want to be intimately and personally involved in this rebuilding and in this work. And I think that if we, again, as with everything else, if we can pull together and pull in the same direction, I think we can. Are we going to fix all the problems? No, not going to be able to. But we can help a lot of people and help in substantial ways. And that's worth doing. That's worth
Yes,
doing, even if it's not perfection.
I agree. Yes. If something is better than nothing.
You mentioned going back to the generation that experienced World War I, World War II, and their trauma to kind of maybe look for answers. And that's, I just want to note that I'm part of the Ukrainian immigrant community here in Philadelphia. I was born in Philadelphia, but I was raised in a immigrant conclave, which is not unusual. And in America, you've got pockets of Italians, pockets of Koreans, and then large pockets of Ukrainians in a northern city. Those of us who are still lucky enough to have parents alive, our parents are broken by this. They're seeing the images on the TV and they are remembering, and it's coming back so fast. And as a child growing up, there's very few pictures which you see a bunch of Ukrainians smiling, right? Everybody's like very serious and stuff. And as a child, I think we were spared a lot of the horror that they endured. But I do remember as a child being terrified of airplanes. And we would, we would summer near a place near an airport, and airplanes would fly all the time. And my brother, sister, and I, oh, screaming, running for the house. And only years later did I realize it's because our parents, when they were children and saw airplanes, this was death. This was death
Yes.
coming to them. We also, with our families, noticed that when you see someone after you haven't seen them a long time, very quickly they'll start recalling their horror stories. Like there's this need to talk it out. This is before there was any therapy or recognition of what PTSD is. But we see the impact on the generation that survived World War II. We see how they've carried this pain, not in any visible sense, but it comes out periodically. So I do think there's a lot of wisdom in looking to see what there maybe for answers. Again, just thank you, Dr. Smith, for the question. Thank you, Mr. Alstrup, for answering the question. This is much more painful, and well, this is just horrible.
A neighbor, I live in an area of Denmark that before 1920 it was Germany. They took it from us in 1864, and we got it back because of the Versailles Treaty. So we should thank President Wilson with the 10 ideas of basically 10 points that were later the foundation on human rights in the United Nations Charter. So we had a referendum, and this part where I live came back to Denmark by referendum. And his father, he's an old man, and his father's a long time ago dead. He was a German soldier at the Eastern Front because he had to. He was Danish, but he had to. And he was taken prisoner, and like most other prisoners, German prisoners, were sent to Omsk in Siberia. And then he told me that his father never ever talked about this war and all the traumas he had been through. It was absolutely taboo. But at the very end of his life, he did mention that he came back home to Denmark from America, and the family could not understand it. And I could then explain, because Siberia is my specialty. I've been there so much, so I knew about Kolchak, the White Guards in Siberia, and how the prisoners of war in Siberia had to go east. They could not go west because there was a new war, the civil war of Imperial Russia. So they had to go out via Vladivostok, and that was American controlled at that time. And that was the explanation. It's not to make a history lesson, but it's only to say that I am the one 3 years ago telling this family about this thing that happened 100 years ago, and it was still a trauma in the family.
Thank you. Thank you, Jens. We are honored to have you on our program, and we need people like you speaking to the world. We hope this small account will be seen by other people. Please share it on Facebook and elsewhere. Our recording will be online soon, and we want you back whenever you have time and desire, sometime in a few months before or after your next trip. There's so much to tell, and 2 years of war is enormous time. We understand it even from here. Even worse because of the politics and everything that goes on. Ukraine cannot win without American help. Whoever listens to us, this is the election year, this is politics as usual, and Ukraine is not on front pages.
No.
Please listen. Thank you very much, Jens.
Victor, if it's okay, I just want to point out also, just so that our listeners don't miss this, because you are very modest, Mr. Alstrup, and you've not talked a lot about this part of what you're doing, that you personally yourself collect and deliver supplies to Ukrainian soldiers, refugees. You've driven refugees back to reunite them with their family. You provide soldiers with boots, sleeping bags, batteries, all just very practical things. You yourself, as an individual, in addition to founding and establishing an organization to help, you yourself are physically doing all this. So I just want our listeners to understand who exactly you are. I'm going to put a link about an article about you in the chat as well, and we'll put that with our materials. Thank you. I've also put in the chat a link to your organization as well, if anybody is willing and able to support. And I am putting all that in right now. I just want our listeners to recognize who you are. I don't know, like, thank you for being a journalist. Thank you for being a volunteer, but you're not just running an organization. You are there, as the photos that you shared indicate, you are there yourself, risking your life to save others. Thank you.
You're welcome. And when you have friends, you help your friends. That's how I see it. I had friends in Ukraine already before the full-scale war. And of course, I help my friends.
Thank you. Thank you for all you're doing. We'll conclude our Friday program here, marking the sad anniversary of 2 years of full-scale Russian invasion in Ukraine tomorrow, 24th of February. Dr. Shrey, please say something to our friends in Ukraine.
Дорогі браття і сестри в Україні, ми зберігаємо вас у наших щоденних думках і молитвах. Нехай милосердний Бог тримає вас у своїй опіці. До наступного тижня. Прощаємося.
Слава Україні!
Героям слава!
Героям
Героям
слава!
слава!